My father grabbed the microphone at my wedding reception and held up the worn leather passbook my grandfather had pressed into my hands just minutes before. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with that trademark smirk I'd seen crush better men than me, "let me show you what happens to trash in the Mercer family." He didn't just mock it. He dropped that passbook straight into a bucket of champagne and melting ice while 300 guests erupted in laughter. I'm Noah Mercer, and at that moment, standing there in my wedding tux, I had a choice. I could let him win again like I'd been doing my entire life. Or I could do what no one expected. I plunged my hand into that freezing bucket, ruined my Armani tuxedo jacket to save those wet pages, looked my father dead in the eyes, and walked straight out of my own wedding reception without saying a single word. My bride Sarah followed me without hesitation, and we drove away in confused silence, water dripping from the passbook onto my lap. What I didn't know then, what my father, Richard, couldn't possibly have known despite all his supposed business genius, was that those wet, champagne-soaked pages contained the key to destroying everything he'd built. Before I tell you about the day, I walked into that bank vault and discovered my grandfather's real legacy. Before I show you how I used a 70-year-old man's final gift to expose the most elaborate fraud in Boston's financial history, I need you to understand something crucial. The cruelest thing someone can do to you isn't physical violence. It's making you believe you're worthless, while they steal everything that should have been yours. That's what my father spent 29 years doing to me, and he almost succeeded. 3 days after the wedding disaster, I pushed through the heavy brass doors of First National Bank in downtown Boston. The lobby smelled like old money and hushed secrets, all marble floors and whispered conversations between men in $1,000 suits. I was wearing jeans and a hoodie, still looking like the disappointment my father always told me I was. The passbook was sealed in a plastic Ziploc bag, the pages wrinkled and stained with champagne residue, looking exactly like the garbage my father had called it in front of everyone who mattered in our social circle. I'm Noah, and at 29, I'd perfected the art of being invisible. As an emergency room physician, I learned early how to fade into the background while attending. Surgeons screamed orders and patients bled out on gurneys. I learned how to hold secrets, how to see things others missed, how to stay calm when everything was falling apart. But standing there at that polished counter, waiting for the young teller to finish her phone call, I felt completely exposed. Every instinct told me to leave, to throw the passbook away like my father wanted, to stop hoping that my grandfather Samuel had left me anything except disappointment. "I need to check the balance on this account," I said, sliding the Ziploc bag across the counter. "It was a gift from my grandfather before he passed." The teller looked about 22, probably fresh out of college, working her first real job. She picked up the bag with 2 fingers like it might contaminate her, her nose wrinkling slightly at the champagne stains. I watched her type in the account number, probably expecting an error message or maybe a balance of $50 from 1985. Then everything changed. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. She blinked, leaned closer to her screen, and I watched the color drain completely from her face like someone had opened a valve. "Sir," she whispered, her voice actually trembling, "please don't move. Don't leave. I need to get my manager right now." She didn't press a silent alarm, but she might as well have. Within 30 seconds, the branch manager appeared, followed by a man in a suit that cost more than my car, introducing himself as the regional director. They weren't looking at my hoodie or my scuffed sneakers anymore. They were looking at me like I was royalty, who'd been living in exile and just walked back into the kingdom. "Mr. Mercer," the director said, his hand on my elbow, guiding me toward a heavy steel door I'd never noticed in the back of the lobby. "Please come with us. We've been waiting for this account to be claimed for a very, very long time." They led me into a private viewing room that smelled like dust and old paper and decisions made decades ago. The kind of room where fortunes are transferred and dynasties begin or end. As they disappeared into the vault to retrieve the file, I sat alone in a leather chair that probably cost more than my medical school loans, and suddenly I wasn't in that bank anymore. I was 12 years old again, kneeling on the hardwood floor of my father's study with a rag in my bleeding hands. Richard sat in his armchair swirling expensive scotch, watching me scrub up the liquor he'd spilled. I knew he did it on purpose. I always knew. But the rule in our house was carved in stone and repeated until I believed it was natural law. Real men build empires. Failures clean up the mess. My older brother, Hunter, was sprawled on the leather sofa, controller in hand, laughing at his video game while his feet rested on the coffee table. I'd just spent an hour polishing. "You missed a spot, Noah," Richard said softly. He never yelled. Yelling was for people who'd lost control. Richard preferred a different kind of cruelty, the methodical kind that required an audience and perfect timing. He liked watching the exact moment when the light went out in someone's eyes. It was entertainment for him, performance art. When Grandpa Samuel shuffled into the study and tried to help me up, tried to hand me a clean cloth, Richard's voice transformed into something sharp enough to cut bone. "Touch that rag, old man, and I'll have you in a state facility so fast you won't even remember your own name. You want to live out your final years drooling in a hallway? Keep interfering with how I raise my son." I scrubbed until my knuckles bled that day. I scrubbed because I genuinely believed I had no value beyond what I could endure. No purpose except to absorb punishment and call it love. The heavy metallic clank of the vault door brought me back to the present. I opened my eyes. I wasn't that 12-year-old kid anymore, even though part of me would always be on my knees in that study. I was the man holding the evidence that would either validate my grandfather's faith in me or confirm my father's assessment of my worthlessness. The director placed a thick manila file on the mahogany table between us. His expression was carefully neutral, the way people look when they're about to change your entire life. "Mr. Mercer," he began, "your grandfather didn't just open a savings account. In 1982, Samuel Mercer established what's called a Totten Trust. He was an early investor in Apple Computer and Microsoft. Not large positions by today's institutional standards, but he had remarkable timing and even more remarkable discipline. He turned a document toward me, and I saw my name typed on official bank letterhead. He funneled every dividend back into the portfolio, reinvested everything, never touched a single dollar. For 43 years, this account has been growing, compounding, waiting for the specific conditions of the trust to be met. Those conditions were simple. Payable to Noah Samuel Mercer upon the death of the grantor. His finger traced down to a number at the bottom of the page. The current value of the trust, legally payable to you as of your grandfather's death 3 weeks ago, is $12,400,000. The number just sat there on the page, black ink on white paper, absolute and undeniable. $12,400,000. I stared at it. I thought about the champagne bucket. I thought about Richard standing at that microphone, gripping that passbook, announcing to everyone at my wedding that my grandfather's final gift was literal trash. He'd held $12 million in his hand and thrown it away because he was too arrogant, too absolutely certain of his own superiority, to look past the worn leather cover. "Is there anyone else listed on this account?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, clinical and detached. The same tone I used in the ER when I had to tell families their loved one didn't make it. "No, sir," the director said. "Just you. Your grandfather was very specific. This trust is entirely and solely yours. Your father has no legal claim to these assets whatsoever." I reached out and touched the dried, stained passbook sitting on the table between us. It wasn't just money. It was validation. It was my grandfather reaching from beyond the grave to tell me that Richard was wrong, that I had always had value, that I'd been worth investing in all along. And in that moment, sitting in that vault room, I realized something that made my hands start shaking. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a weapon. And for the first time in my entire life, I knew exactly where to aim it and how much damage I could do. My wife Sarah was sitting at our kitchen table when I walked through the door of our tiny apartment. She looked up from her laptop, saw my face, and immediately knew something massive had shifted. "Noah," she said quietly, "what happened at the bank?" Sarah isn't just a data analyst. She's a forensic accountant who specializes in corporate fraud investigation. She finds patterns in numbers that other people miss, sees the cracks in financial foundations that look solid to everyone else. We met in grad school, fell in love over spreadsheets and late-night study sessions, and she married me despite knowing exactly how toxic my family was. She was the only person who'd ever looked at me and seen something worth keeping. $12 million, I said, and watched her eyes go wide. The passbook was real. Grandpa Samuel invested in Apple and Microsoft in the early 80s. Never touched it. left everything to me. She stood up, crossed the small kitchen, and pulled me into a hug that felt like the first safe moment I'd had since my grandfather died. Then she pulled back and I saw that look in her eyes. The one she got when she was already 3 steps ahead, already seeing the bigger picture. Noah, there's something you need to see. I've been digging into your father's finances since the wedding. I couldn't stop thinking about why he reacted so violently to that passbook, why he humiliated you so publicly. So I pulled some records. She turned her laptop toward me, and I felt my entire understanding of reality tilt sideways. The screen showed spreadsheets, tax documents, bank statements, all color-coded and cross-referenced in the methodical way that made Sarah brilliant at her job. It's not an empire, Noah, she said, her voice flat and factual. It's a Ponzi scheme built on bridge loans, phantom assets, and his own massive ego. I looked at the numbers. I expected to see the wealth my father bragged about at every charity gala, every family dinner, every opportunity. He had to remind me that he was successful, and I was merely surviving. Instead, everything was red, debt, obligations, money that didn't exist. He's completely insolvent, Sarah continued, tapping a document with her pen. The mansion in Newport? Foreclosure proceedings started 4 weeks ago. The family trust he claims to manage and use to justify his lifestyle. It's empty. He's been moving the same $47,000 between 6 different shell companies to create the illusion of liquidity. Whenever anyone looks, she pulled up another file. And here's the important part. The IRS sent him a notice of deficiency 2 months ago. He's being audited for tax fraud going back 15 years. Noah, your father isn't a business tycoon. He's a desperate man about to go to federal prison, and he's been frantically searching for any asset he can liquidate to stay afloat. I stared at the screen, watching my entire childhood recontextualize itself in real time. The man who threw my grandfather's passbook into a champagne bucket wasn't a titan of industry, dismissing something beneath his notice. He was a drowning man who couldn't recognize a life preserver when he held it in his hands. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Richard Mercer. I looked at Sarah. She nodded and hit the speaker button. We both needed to hear this. Noah. My father's voice filled our small kitchen, and I realized with sudden clarity that I'd been conditioned my entire life to feel smaller the moment I heard that tone. There was no apology for the wedding, no acknowledgement that he'd humiliated me in front of everyone I knew. Just the brash, unearned confidence of a man who genuinely believed he still controlled the world. I've been thinking about that property your grandfather left you. The cottage up on the coast. What about it? I asked, working to keep my voice neutral even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I'm going to do you a favor, son. I've already spoken with my real estate attorney. We can liquidate it quickly, get you a fair market price, and I'll invest the proceeds into the family business so you actually see a return on the asset. You're a doctor, Noah. You don't know the first thing about property management or coastal real estate tax implications. I'm trying to save you from making a massive mistake. The cottage. It was the only other tangible thing Samuel had left me besides the passbook. A small oceanfront property worth maybe $300,000. Pocket change to a supposed billionaire. But clearly a lifeline to a desperate fraudster who needed any injection of liquidity he could find. I'm not selling the cottage, Dad, I said. The line went completely silent. Then I heard the exact moment when his mask cracked and fell away. You listen to me very carefully, he snarled, his voice dropping into a register I recognized from childhood, the one that preceded real violence. That senile old man was mentally incompetent when he signed that deed. I have 3 witnesses ready to testify that you manipulated a vulnerable geriatric into signing over family assets while he was on heavy medication. If you don't sign the transfer paperwork I'm sending over by Friday, I will personally sue you for elder abuse and fraud. I will drag you through probate court until you're bankrupt and professionally ruined. Do you understand me, Noah? You are completely out of your depth here. He wasn't trying to protect me. He wasn't offering fatherly advice. He was hunting for assets. Any piece of property he could seize and sell to plug the holes in his sinking ship. And he was threatening to destroy me legally if I didn't cooperate with my own robbery. I understand perfectly, Dad, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. Good. I'll have my attorney send over the paperwork tonight. Sign it and return it within 48 hours. The line went dead. I looked at Sarah. She wasn't scared. She was smiling, a cold, calculating smile that matched the feeling rising in my chest like ice, water filling my lungs. "He just showed us his hand," she said quietly. "He's desperate, and desperate men make catastrophic mistakes." Richard thought he was bullying a disappointing son into surrendering assets. He had no idea he'd just handed us the complete blueprint to his own destruction. Waited exactly 24 hours before calling him back. Silence is a powerful amplifier when you're dealing with someone who's drowning. It lets the desperation multiply, lets them imagine worst-case scenarios, makes them vulnerable. Sarah and I spent that day in careful preparation. We didn't hire a lawyer to fight the cottage sale. We hired a graphic designer who specialized in financial documents and had him create a portfolio of investment papers that looked absolutely legitimate. When I finally dialed Richard's number, I channeled every ounce of the frightened, uncertain son he expected me to be. I didn't summon the confident man who'd walked out of that bank vault holding $12 million. I summoned the 12-year-old boy on his knees, terrified of disappointing the man who was supposed to protect him. "Dad," I said when he answered, letting my voice shake just slightly. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't mean to. I was just confused." "You should be sorry." He snapped, but I could hear the shift in his tone. The edge was softer now. He was listening, calculating. "It's not just the cottage," I continued, pitching my voice to sound panicked and naive. "I went to the bank like you told me to. The passbook." "Dad, it wasn't empty." The line went absolutely silent. I could practically hear him doing the mental calculations, his brain racing through possibilities. "How much?" he finally asked, and the greed in his voice was so thick I could almost taste it through the phone. $12 million, I whispered, letting the words crack like I was about to cry. "Dad, it's $12 million and I don't know what to do." The bank manager started talking about capital gains taxes and federal reporting requirements. "And I think I'm in serious trouble. If the IRS finds out I suddenly have this money, they're going to take half of it. I don't know how to protect it. I don't know how any of this works." It was perfect bait. I was handing him exactly what he believed about me, that I was weak, incompetent, and incapable of handling real power. And I was handing him exactly what he needed. A massive injection of capital to cover his fraud and buy himself time before the federal investigation crushed him. "Listen to me very carefully, Noah," he said, and his voice transformed instantly from bully to savior. It was genuinely chilling how fast he could shift personas. "Do not sign anything with the bank. Do not talk to any financial advisors or attorneys. You bring that documentation to me. I can shelter it under the family trust structure. We can classify it as a pre-existing asset that's been in the family for generations. It's complicated, but I can make the tax liability disappear completely. I'm doing this to protect you, son, to protect our family legacy. Protect me." He wanted to swallow the entire inheritance, funnel it into his shell companies, and use it to plug the holes in his collapsing fraud scheme. "Can we do this soon?" I asked, injecting urgency into my voice. "Like tonight?" "I'm really scared, Dad." "No," he said too quickly. He needed time to prepare the fake transfer documents, time to set up the legal framework that would give him control. "I have the Man of the Year charity gala on Saturday in Boston. It's perfect timing, actually. Bring all the bank documentation there. We'll sign everything in the VIP suite before the speeches start. I'll even make an announcement about the expansion of the family foundation. It'll look completely legitimate. And you'll be protected under the corporate umbrella." He wanted an audience. He wanted the glory of announcing a $12 million windfall as proof of his business genius, his family's success, his continued dominance. "Okay," I said, letting relief flood my voice. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you for fixing this. I knew you'd know what to do. That's what fathers are for." "Son," he said, and I heard the satisfaction in his voice. He thought he'd won. I hung up and looked at Sarah. The fear and uncertainty vanished from my face like turning off a light switch. "He took it," I said. "Every word," Sarah nodded, already pulling up the documents we'd actually prepared. They looked exactly like the standard trust transfer forms Richard would expect to see. Same fonts, same headers, same official-looking seals. But the fine print wasn't transferring funds to a family trust. It was an affidavit of sole liability, linking Richard Mercer as the legal custodian of every shell company we'd identified in Sarah's investigation, backdated across 20 years of financial activity. Richard thought he was reeling in a confused, frightened son. He didn't realize he'd just invited his own executioner to the execution the man of the year. Charity Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza, one of Boston's most prestigious venues. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the shoulders of the city's elite. Politicians, CEOs, old money families who'd controlled New England for generations. It was exactly the kind of room where my father thrived, where he could perform his greatest role, the self-made billionaire, the philanthropist, the patriarch of a powerful dynasty. I arrived at 7:55, 15 minutes before Richard's scheduled speech. I wasn't wearing the khakis and button-down shirt he'd always insisted made me look presentable. Was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my first car, custom fit and sharp enough to make a statement. I walked through the crowd, not around it, making eye contact, owning my space in a way I'd never allowed myself before. I saw Hunter near the bar, 3 drinks deep, laughing too loudly with a group of young lawyers who were probably trying to network with the Mercer name. He didn't see me. He was too busy playing the role of the crown prince to a kingdom that was already burning down around him. Richard stood at the front of the room, flanked by 2 state senators and a federal judge. He looked radiant, glowing with the confidence of a man who thought he'd just executed the con of the century. When he saw me approaching through the crowd, his smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He excused himself from the politicians and met me near the stage steps. "You're late," he hissed through his perfect smile, keeping his voice low so the nearby photographers wouldn't catch anything. "Do you have the documents?" "I have everything," I said, holding out a blue leather presentation folder. He snatched it from my hands with barely concealed greed. His hands were actually shaking slightly, and I realized he was even more desperate than Sarah had calculated. "Is it all here?" he demanded. "The transfer authorizations, the power of attorney documentation." "Everything you asked for, Dad. It transfers the full $12 million into the family trust structure. We can classify it as a pre-existing asset that's been in the family for generations. It's complicated, but I can make the tax liability disappear completely. I'm doing this to protect you, son, to protect our family legacy. Protect me." He wanted to swallow the entire inheritance, funnel it into his shell companies, and use it to plug the holes in his collapsing fraud scheme. "Can we do this soon?" I asked, injecting urgency into my voice. "Like tonight?" "I'm really scared, Dad." "No," he said too quickly. He needed time to prepare the fake transfer documents, time to set up the legal framework that would give him control. "I have the Man of the Year charity gala on Saturday in Boston. It's perfect timing, actually. Bring all the bank documentation there. We'll sign everything in the VIP suite before the speeches start. I'll even make an announcement about the expansion of the family foundation. It'll look completely legitimate. And you'll be protected under the corporate umbrella." He wanted an audience. He wanted the glory of announcing a $12 million windfall as proof of his business genius, his family's success, his continued dominance. "Okay," I said, letting relief flood my voice. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you for fixing this. I knew you'd know what to do. That's what fathers are for." "Son," he said, and I heard the satisfaction in his voice. He thought he'd won. I hung up and looked at Sarah. The fear and uncertainty vanished from my face like turning off a light switch. "He took it," I said. "Every word," Sarah nodded, already pulling up the documents we'd actually prepared. They looked exactly like the standard trust transfer forms Richard would expect to see. Same fonts, same headers, same official-looking seals. But the fine print wasn't transferring funds to a family trust. It was an affidavit of sole liability, linking Richard Mercer as the legal custodian of every shell company we'd identified in Sarah's investigation, backdated across 20 years of financial activity. Richard thought he was reeling in a confused, frightened son. He didn't realize he'd just invited his own executioner to the execution. The Man of the Year charity gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza, one of Boston's most prestigious venues. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the shoulders of the city's elite. Politicians, CEOs, old money families who'd controlled New England for generations. It was exactly the kind of room where my father thrived, where he could perform his greatest role, the self-made billionaire, the philanthropist, the patriarch of a powerful dynasty. I arrived at 7:55, 15 minutes before Richard's scheduled speech. I wasn't wearing the khakis and button-down shirt he'd always insisted made me look presentable. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my first car, custom fit and sharp enough to make a statement. I walked through the crowd, not around it, making eye contact, owning my space in a way I'd never allowed myself before. I saw Hunter near the bar, 3 drinks deep, laughing too loudly with a group of young lawyers who were probably trying to network with the Mercer name. He didn't see me. He was too busy playing the role of the crown prince to a kingdom that was already burning down around him. Richard stood at the front of the room, flanked by 2 state senators and a federal judge. He looked radiant, glowing with the confidence of a man who thought he'd just executed the con of the century. When he saw me approaching through the crowd, his smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He excused himself from the politicians and met me near the stage steps. "You're late," he hissed through his perfect smile, keeping his voice low so the nearby photographers wouldn't catch anything. "Do you have the documents?" "I have everything," I said, holding out a blue leather presentation folder. He snatched it from my hands with barely concealed greed. His hands were actually shaking slightly, and I realized he was even more desperate than Sarah had calculated. "Is it all here?" he demanded. "The transfer authorizations, the power of attorney documentation." "Everything you asked for, Dad. It transfers the full $12 million into the family trust structure. You just need to sign as the sole trustee to accept the assets. Into the corporate umbrella." He opened the folder right there, standing 5 feet from the stage, where he was about to give the biggest speech of his career. He didn't read the clauses. He didn't examine the fine print. He didn't question why the document was titled Affidavit of Historical Management and Sole Liability, or why there were dates going back 20 years, linking him personally to every shell company, every phantom asset, every fraudulent transaction Sarah had uncovered. A smart man would have had his attorney review it. A smart man would have asked questions. But Richard wasn't smart. He was arrogant. He believed so completely in his own superiority, in my inadequacy, that he couldn't conceive of a world where I was the threat. He pulled out his Mont Blanc pen, the one he'd used to sign contracts worth millions, and scrawled his signature across the bottom with a flourish. "You did the right thing, Noah," he said, handing the folder back to me without a second glance, finally showing some backbone, some family loyalty. He turned toward the stage, already dismissing me. "Go find a seat toward the back. I have an announcement that's going to change everything." He bounded up the stairs, to the stage like a man 20 years younger. The room quieted. Conversations died. The spotlight hit him, and Richard Mercer stepped into what he thought was his greatest moment. I didn't go to the back. I moved to the side of the room, pulled out my phone, photographed the signature page in perfect detail, and hit send. 3 miles away, Sarah received the image, attached it to the whistleblower complaint we'd finalized with a federal prosecutor 2 days earlier, and uploaded everything to the Department of Justice's secure portal. Every shell company, every fraudulent transaction, every piece of evidence showing 20 years of tax evasion, wire fraud, and securities violations. All of it now tied directly to Richard Mercer's fresh signature. Legally binding, absolutely indisputable. My phone buzzed with Sarah's response. "Received. DOJ confirmation code 99 Alpha. It's done." On stage, Richard took the microphone. His voice boomed across the ballroom, confident and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, I'm honored to announce a historic expansion of the Mercer Family Foundation, a $12 million investment in Boston's future, in our community, in the legacy that my family has built over generations." He was confessing, in real time, in front of 500 witnesses. He was claiming ownership of funds I had just legally tied to 2 decades of systematic fraud. He thought he was unveiling his greatest achievement. He was reading his own indictment out loud. The 60-foot LED screen behind him flickered. The foundation logo vanished, replaced by the Department of Justice seal, stamped with bright red letters. "Federal asset seizure. In progress. Case 8842 ALB. The applause that had started to build collapsed into confused silence. Richard turned around, more puzzled than afraid, his brain refusing to process a reality that didn't match his script. That was his fatal flaw. Not stupidity, but the absolute conviction that he was untouchable, that the rules applied to everyone except him. The ballroom doors burst open. 6 IRS criminal investigation. Division agents swept down the center aisle in perfect formation. "Richard Mercer," the lead agent called out, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Step away from the podium, please." Richard's hand tightened on the microphone. Do you have any idea who I am? He said, his voice still projecting across the room like he was in control. We do, sir, the agent replied calmly. You're the sole trustee who, 17 minutes ago, signed a legal affidavit, accepting personal responsibility for 20 years of unreported offshore accounts, fraudulent tax filings, and wire fraud across state lines. We have your signature, witnessed and time-stamped. Richard spun toward me, and I watched comprehension finally dawn across his face. The realization that he'd been played, that the disappointing son he'd spent decades crushing had just destroyed him with his own arrogance. He tricked me, Richard shouted, pointing directly at me. My son, he forged documents. He manipulated. Save it for your attorney. Mr. Mercer, the agent interrupted. Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Camera flashes erupted from every corner of the ballroom as Boston's elite watched. Richard Mercer get arrested at his own charity gala, stripped of his pretense, reduced to just another man in an expensive tuxedo facing federal charges. I thought it was over. I was wrong. The VIP suite door slammed behind me with enough force to rattle the champagne glasses on the side table. I turned to see Hunter standing there, his face purple with rage and alcohol, sweat beading on his forehead. His hand fumbled with the door lock. You destroyed everything, he hissed, advancing toward me. Do you have any idea what you've done? That was our family, our legacy, our future. It was already destroyed, Hunter, I said, keeping my voice level and calm, the same tone I used in the ER when patients were spiraling toward violence. The money never existed. Dad's been running a fraud scheme for 20 years. This was always going to end badly. I just controlled how it happened. Controlled? He laughed, high-pitched and manic. You've always been weak, Noah. Always. Dad was right about you. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. His hand grabbed a steak knife from the serving tray near the window. This wasn't strategy anymore. This wasn't calculated business rivalry. This was pure desperation. The moment when the illusion of superiority collapses, and all that's left is animal panic. Hunter, put the knife down, I said. This isn't going to help you. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore, he said, and lunged. I'd spent 6 years in emergency medicine. I knew how to move when people lost control. I sidestepped, caught his wrist, and used his own momentum to drive him face first into the wall. The knife skittered across the marble floor. His arm twisted at an angle that made me wince professionally even as I held him there. Security burst through the door 10 seconds later. By then, Hunter was sobbing, not from the pain in his arm, but from the realization that he was irrelevant. That without Richard's fraud propping him up, he had nothing. No skills, no prospects, no inheritance waiting to catch him. The IRS agents who'd arrested our father took Hunter away in handcuffs for assault. I watched them go, feeling nothing except a strange, hollow sense of completion. That was 4 weeks ago. This morning I'm sitting on the porch of my cottage, the one my grandfather left me. I spent the last month fixing the roof, clearing the overgrown ivy, repainting the shutters, turning it from a symbol of family obligation into an actual home. The ocean stretches out in front of me, gray and endless and clean. Richard was denied bail. Every one of his assets has been frozen by federal order. The mansion in Newport is being auctioned to pay restitution to the investors he defrauded. His empire is being liquidated piece by piece, revealing it was always just smoke and mirrors held together by ego and other people's money. Hunter took a plea deal, 5 years probation, mandatory financial counseling, and a permanent bar from working in financial services. No inheritance awaits him when he completes his sentence. Just the opportunity to learn, for the first time in his life, what it means to actually work. Sarah sits down beside me on the porch steps, handing me a cup of coffee. She's holding a manila folder. The trust transfer is complete, she says. All $12,400,000. It's entirely yours. So what do you want to do with it? I look out at the ocean, at the waves that have been crashing against these rocks. Since long before my grandfather was born, that'll keep crashing long after I'm gone. $12 million. A fortune that could change everything or nothing depending on how I use it. Nothing, I say. Let it keep growing. Keep compounding. I'm still a doctor. I'm still Noah. The money isn't power, Sarah. It's protection. It's the freedom to never have to be small again. To never have to kneel and scrub while someone tells me, I'm worthless. She nods, understanding completely. And the lesson you learned from all this? I think about my grandfather, about a 70-year-old, Man who invested in the future because he believed in me when no one else did. I think about Richard, rotting in a federal holding cell because he was too arrogant to imagine his victim could become his destroyer. I think about the difference between wealth and worth, between power and value, between the empire someone builds and the legacy they actually leave behind. Family isn't blood, I say finally. It's who stands with you when the vault opens. It's who sees your value when the world says you're trash. And real power isn't about dominating other people. It's about knowing your own worth and never letting anyone convince you to settle for less. Sarah raises her coffee cup to Samuel Mercer, and to wet passbooks that turn out to be treasure maps. I smile and clink my cup against hers. Somewhere in a federal detention center, Richard is realizing that the son he tried to destroy just inherited everything he pretended to have. Somewhere in Boston, investigators are unraveling 20 years of fraud that will rewrite financial crime textbooks. And here on this porch, watching the ocean, I'm finally free. Not because of the money, because I finally understand what my grandfather was really giving me when he pressed that passbook into my hands. It wasn't wealth. It was permission to believe I mattered. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what you receive. It's discovering you were always worth more than they told you. And sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about watching arrogance destroy itself while you simply hold up a mirror and let the truth do the rest. My name is Noah Mercer. I'm 29 years old. I'm a doctor, a husband, and the grandson of a man who saw my worth when I couldn't see it myself. And this is the story of how a champagne-soaked passbook became the key to destroying an empire built on lies and reclaiming a life built on truth.